In a recent interview with Marketplace, FCC Chairman Ajit Pai actually claimed that the United States' citizens support his pro-corporate anti-net neutrality agenda. He literally claimed this, and he reiterated it and doubled down. Now, according to a December 2017 poll from the University of Maryland, they found that 83% of the public supports net neutrality. And yes, that includes both Republicans and Democrats. But in spite of that, he insists that the public is with him on this issue. So this is how Ajit Pai responded when a journalist asked him about just how unpopular his decision to repeal net neutrality is. So they say, this is not a popular decision. Millions of people have written in opposition to it. Public opinion polling shows most Americans favor net neutrality, not your open internet rule. And I wonder why you're doing this then. If public opinion is against you, what are you doing? Pai says, first of all, public opinion is not against us. If you look at some of the polls, and then they interrupt saying, no, it is, sir, come on. Pai then says, if you look at some of the polling, if you dig down and see how these polls were constructed, it was clearly designed to reach a particular result. But even beyond that, and then they interrupt again, saying, it's not just one, there are many surveys, sir. Pai then says the FCC's job is not to put a finger in the wind and decide which way the winds are blowing. It's to look at the facts and make a sober judgment based on what the law is, and that is exactly what we've done here. Moreover, the long-term interest is in building better, faster, cheaper internet access. That is what consumers say when I travel around the country, and I've spoken to consumers in Los Angeles, to the reservation in South Dakota, places like Dahlonega, Georgia. That is what is on consumers' minds. That is what this regulatory framework is going to deliver. Now, I think if any other person said what he just said, I'd think that they were delusional, but because it's Ajit Pai, we know he's just lying through his teeth. So, after the journalist corrects him and says, come on, this is ridiculous, of course the public doesn't support your pro-corporate agenda, well, here's what he says. Well, you know what? They actually want faster and cheaper access to the internet. And while that's technically true, his version of cheaper internet is basically allowing Comcast, for example, to disaggregate the internet and sell you a social media package with Facebook and Twitter only for $10 a month. And then he'll say, look, that's cheaper internet. Now people can have access to Facebook. More people than ever are now going on Facebook. When the internet isn't like television, what is what he's trying to turn it into. The internet should be sold as one thing. And if you allow these internet service providers to disaggregate the internet and sell packages and throttle access to websites they don't like or their competitors, then you are reducing freedom on the internet. You're making the internet less open. But he claims, oh, well, you know what? I actually care about the open internet. And ironically enough, the name of the order to repeal net neutrality is called Restoring Open Internet Order, or Restoring Freedom on the Internet Order, some Orwellian titled bill. But Ajit, we don't agree with what you want to do. We are vociferously against you. And I mean, a simple thing you can do to see just how much the public not only disagrees with Ajit Pai, but hates him, look at his Twitter feed. Every time he posts some weird, like, benign, banal thing, all the comments are about net neutrality. When you look at any interview he's done with CBS or Fox News, the like to dislike ratio is always insane. Now, the reason why Americans don't like you, Ajit Pai, isn't because of personal reasons. We despise you because you're doing everything in your power to screw over consumers and strip away consumer protections when you lead an agency that's supposed to regulate an industry you're shilling for. And to show you just how much of a corporate shill Ajit Pai is, well, there's another scandal involving him this week, involving Sinclair. So as Gizmodo's DJ Dellinger reports, fresh off finally completing the goal of killing net neutrality protections, Ajit Pai's Federal Communications Commission is onto its next attempt to destroy long-standing rules that have protected American consumers. According to Bloomberg, the FCC is planning on sneaking in a vote to change limits on how many television stations a single company can own own to make way for Sinclair Broadcast Group's massive takeover of local broadcasting. Per the report, FCC Chairman Ajit Pai intends to schedule a vote on July 12th to alter the current cap on the reach of a single broadcaster. The vote would allow the FCC to get out ahead of the United States Court of Appeals, which is currently hearing a case challenging part of the current rules that limit station ownership. The vote would allow the FCC to leapfrog the courts and put its own ruling forward first. The vote would tackle a decades-old rule first introduced in the 1970s that attended to prevent massive media mergers that would allow a single company to control the majority of the airwaves across the country. These regulations set the cap at 39% of all households, but Pai is ready to blow that up in order to do a favor for Sinclair, or broadcaster with the conservative bent that has been intent on gobbling up as much control of local markets as possible. Pai hasn't publicly expressed where he believes the media ownership bar should be, but odds are good it'll be around 72%, since that's how far Sinclair's reach would become if its proposed $6.6 billion acquisition of Tribune Media is allowed to pass. The merger would allow Sinclair to gain access to 42 news stations and markets, which it could use to blast out its now infamous must-run segments like the bizarre promo about fake news it forced anchors to read earlier this year. Now, think about just how shameless Ajit Pai is. The average American, under as much scrutiny as he's facing, would choose to just sit this one out. Let the U.S. Court of Appeals make its decision. Don't do anything that could be perceived as you helping Sinclair, because you're already under scrutiny, but he doesn't care. He doesn't care at all. He has no shame whatsoever. He doesn't think about how bad the optics look or how terrible his agency will look. He's literally intervening specifically to assist a company he's supposed to be regulating. That is how brazenly corrupt this individual is. I mean, I made a comment on Twitter about him basically being on Scott Pruitt's level of corruption, but I think he might actually be more corrupt than Scott Pruitt. You're trying to bolster Sinclair's legal argument by changing regulations so that way they're empowered as they go into the U.S. Court of Appeals. I mean, it literally doesn't get more shameless than that. I can't think of another example. He is the most corrupt person in our government right now. But he doesn't even care about the optics. Unbelievable. So getting back to the original discussion, no, we're not in favor of what you're doing. You don't have the public support. You don't have a mandate, Ajit Pai. All you're doing is the bidding of your former employer and the internet service providers, and that's all you're doing. You're a corporate shill. You are an empty suit doing nothing but representing the interests of the industry you're supposed to be regulating. You should be impeached. In fact, you should have resigned in shame for how disgustingly corrupt you are. But there should be calls from every lawmaker in the country calling on you to either resign or be impeached, because this is completely indefensible. You are as corrupt as they come. And the fact that you're still going out of your way to spit in the eyes of Americans shows just how disgusting and ruthless of a person you are. Shame on you, Ajit Pai.
Support this podcast by becoming a patron at patreon.com/Humanist Report.